So he's been a really amazing part of the community, and I'm happy to turn over the floor to him. So please welcome Keith Kovala.
So Shashi roped me into this because of the, I don't know if you remember the Zortrax M200 I brought in a few months ago that was reconditioned, brought back to life. So he asked me to do something on modernizing your 3D printer. And so I'm just going to kind of talk you through some of the parts of the printer, what parts you really don't need to change and what parts you may want to change in order to actually get it to be more current and kind of prolong its life. Because there are certain things that kind of stay still and some things that are constantly changing. So I broke down the major components of a 3D printer, and I've specifically broke these down into just 4 pieces. And it's going to be from least changing to the one that's changing the most. And that's why I broke it down this way. So the first is the mechanics of the frame. And the frame is pretty much timeless. I mean, we've seen certain models, certain architectures of framework that just aren't going anywhere. They get more stout, the quality of the components goes up, but the actual shape of the parts don't change much. So if you get a nice quality frame, you don't really have to change it much once it's there. So this is probably the part that's going to change the least over time. Then you actually have the build platform. Build platform is another spot that's not going to change a lot, except for maybe the actual print surface itself, because we're dabbling with a lot of different chemical materials and stuff like that to try and get good adhesion for the different types of materials. And so that one, the actual sandwich of the build platform doesn't change a lot, but that top layer may change over time.
What type of materials?
We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, we'll get into that. So then your hot end, your extruder, we're seeing quite a bit of development in this right now in terms of like mixing extruders, extruders that are switching, changing things out, and stuff like that. So we're going to see some change in the extruders, but that can't always change if the next part doesn't. And that's the actual controller. And the reason that the controller has to change a lot of times is because when you buy a printer, they try and lock you out of stuff. So you may have to reflash the controller with an open source firmware like Marlin or something similar to that. Or if you can't reflash the board, you can just change out the controller completely. And you'll see in the examples that I show later that that's a lot of what I've done to recondition or bring these old printers or defunct printers back to life. So as I mentioned earlier, the mechanics of the frame are very much timeless. Who can tell me what that printer on the far left is? Come on.
I know it.
Nobody?
Ultimate.
No, on the far left, next to the Ultimaker.
Darwin.
It's a Darwin. It's before the Mendel. All right, but Ultimaker just celebrated their 10th anniversary, and honestly, that's what the Ultimaker was based off of, was that first printer. And that's an S5 sitting next to it. Visually, it's changed a little bit, but the actual mechanics for the most part are the same. Down below, everybody should know the one next to the Prusa on the left. It's probably the one everybody knows as the first printer. That's the Mendel. And that's what started the whole i3 line. All right, then we have our favorite. I only pictured a Mark II here, not a Mark III, just because I wanted to show that it's changing over time, but not going too far. What's the one on the far right? Anybody know what that one is?
Zmorph VX.
Zmorph VX. What's special about the Zmorph VX?
It's a 3D printer, it's a mill, it's also a laser engraver.
Yeah, so they did the Mendel type structure, rigidified it, made it stronger, and now it can actually handle the torque and the tension forces that are involved in milling and other stuff like that, which we've seen a lot of printers where people are like, oh, this can do all kinds of things, we'll change out the tool. And then it turns out that they built the mechanics so sloppy that that mill that's on there can't do anything. But this one's actually been doing stuff, and people are very happy with it. So, same frame, still going today. So, The build platform, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of a sandwich, and there's only really one layer that's required, and that's the flat rigid metal, which is usually made out of aluminum or glass. The rest of these parts are all kind of optional. If you're doing anything beyond PLA, you may want a heat pad underneath it. If you're like me and don't want to deal with scraping stuff off the build plate, you'll go with a magnetic film, a spring steel sheet, and then some kind of build surface on top of it, so you can just take the platform off, snap it, and get right back to work. Also, in a recent thing that I found out, if you rip your platform and you don't have the spring steel sheet, getting that adhesive off is no fun. I mean, like everybody, I've watched a lot of videos on it, everybody takes over an hour to get that adhesive off that platform. So,
Like MK2S.
at any of them that I've seen where it's like, where the build plate can't come off, I've come to the conclusion that if I have to take another sheet off, I want that spring steel there so I can just throw it into the chemicals and just let it sit, because it takes way too long. But again, as far as the build platform itself, the only thing that's really changing is that top layer, which some people like the build tack, some PEI sheet. There's some other stuff that we're seeing out there now. We've got Gecko Tech hot and cold, and some other platforms that people are trying to use. But that top portion is the only spot that's really changing. And what I did that I really like to be able to try out these new crazy ones is I can just buy another piece of spring steel and then just swap it out. And honestly, when I first got my flex plate system, it wasn't about the snapping of the flex plate to get the part off. For me, the flexibility was changing out the build sheet. So I could just kind of go and, oh, hey, today I want to build and I want to print on this, print on something else. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's PEI right now, but if
Right.
you flip that sheet over, it's built tack.
Yeah, and that's a very common configuration because the PEI sheet can take the heat that the build tack normally can take as well. But there are some ones that you don't want to put on the back of each other because, like the Gecko Tech Cold, it's a cold sheet, means that you don't want to run a heated bed with it, so you don't want to put a hot sheet on the other side of it because you're going to kill that cold. So just got to be careful on which ones you place on which sheet in order to do it. As far as the hot end and the extruder, there's all kinds of options here. And this is where we start really getting to playing with stuff. We have the options of different sizes, 285 versus 175. I kind of like 285. I know that's not a thing that most people like, but 285 is a breeze to handle. In fact, today, Alex tangled up a couple of coils of 175 together, and I'm just like, you know, if it was 285, we wouldn't have that problem. But, so, yeah, you know, 285, it is what it is. And then, of course, yes, sir?
You wouldn't have what problem?
The tangling. 175 likes to tangle really easily. You get it to overlap, and it just kind of gets messed up. And 285, because of the springiness of it, just comes apart a lot easier and reorients itself easily. So it's much nicer material handling for the person.
Coming off the spool?
Coming off the spool, if it falls off, you know, like 175, the rule is don't ever let that end go. Because if you do, it's going to tangle, it's going to knot. 285, you can let it go, rewrap it, it's all good because it doesn't like to twist over itself like 175 does. Yes?
Repeat the question so the video, people watching the video.
Which question?
Just when you.
Okay, in the future.
In it.
Okay. All right. So, 1 second. Alex told me to get a glass of water, but I forgot. So, I'm gonna have to drink my cider. For the most part, we usually see an E3D V6 as the hot end for most people, or a clone thereof. But there are some other interesting hot ends and extruder assemblies that we're seeing out there. And this is one of the things that you may want to play with and change to actually get your printer to do fun and new things. Like me personally, I like to run the Mosquito hot end with a nice 50-watt temperature, or a 50-watt heater cartridge, and a 450C thermistor on it. So I can go and play with some exotic stuff. So, but that's all personal preference. But you can't always get there if your controller, well, your firmware has locked you out. And if you can't reflash the firmware, you gotta change out the controller. So this is where we get into the part that you're going to probably have to change, or at least I suggest changing so that you get the biggest, thank you, sir. This is so you can get the biggest opportunity to do new things. The ramps, or let's go back to the proprietary boards. So the Zortrax systems that I'm going to show you in a few minutes had proprietary boards on them that didn't allow any kind of changes whatsoever, which meant that I had no choice. I had to replace. I certainly didn't want to go with a ramps and Arduino because their life at this point is pretty limited. They're an 8-bit board. They're not going very far anymore. You've got limited input outputs. If you want to do anything fancy with multiple extruders or any kind of MMU type system, which you can take the Prusa MMU and put it on other machines. It's an open source product. It can go on other machines. So if you want to do that, you're not going to really do it with a ramps Arduino. So you got to look into some of the other boards that are more open capable, like you're going to move into generally a 32-bit board, which is going to open up your I/O paths, get you a lot more input output. And the other nice thing is that they're a lot faster, and they're a lot more computational. And so like a lot of people are putting them on deltas right now and seeing that deltas are doing a lot better as a result. Because I don't know if you've ever done any programming before, but if you're trying to do a calculation of sine or cosine to do any kind of circle stuff with an 8-bit board, you're not doing that calculation. You're looking up the answer on a table somewhere in ROM. So it's all estimated, generally to about 3 decimal places. So on an 8-bit board, it's taxing. So going to a 32-bit board just opens you up both I/O-wise and computationally. So as far as the boards that are available, there's tons of them out there. So I've listed up reprap.org. They've got it listed on their website in a very convenient manner. The ones that are most commonly talked about are at the top of their page. And they admit that that's a little delayed, and so there are certain rankings that aren't quite accurate right now. But the most popular ones are towards the top, and then there's a break, and then they list just about everything, so you can kind of see what else is out there. So if you're looking for different types of boards, reprap.org is a place to go. Coincidentally, if you're curious about the history of 3D printing, this is also a very good spot to go. So what I've got pictured here is the typical ramps Arduino kit with your drivers, your ramps, and your Arduino board, which you sandwich together, and then you put the drivers on top. And then down below it is my current favorite board, which is the Duet Wi-Fi. And that board right there replaces everything but that screen. So when you buy that board, you're not having to buy 2 boards plus all these different driver chips. You're just buying the one. And the nice thing about like the Duet board is it already comes ready to connect to the network. It's not this thing where you've got to put something else on it to get your Octoprint or any other kind of interface. You're just ready to roll. It connects to the network, you've got a browser for interface, talk to it. And then of course, you don't need a screen if you've got that. But they also have panels just like Brady has over on his right there. He's running a Duet board with the panels.
They do what?
7?
They do 3, 5, and 7. I don't know.
4, 5, and 7 for the screens.
4, 5, 7.
As far as screens, I would not recommend the 7, even though price-wise it's like.
Thanks.
Hey, I did it. Honestly, I did the 7. The first time I was like, okay, so here's how it goes. Your price on the 4, 5, and 7, they're all within like 10 or 12 bucks of each other, and you're like, well, if I'm gonna get a 5, I might as well get a 7. The 7's just too big. It just looks huge. So don't worry about that extra 10 bucks for the 7 versus the 5. Just go with the 5. The 5's plenty of real estate for what you need to do. Save that few bucks.
Especially with that web server.
Yes.
You don't need it. I found myself, it's stuck on the baby stepping for
Right.
like 2 days straight
Yeah.
because I only touch web server.
Yeah, once you're on to, if you're not web controlling your printer yet, and once you go there, I don't think you'll ever go back, because it's so nice to just be on your computer checking things out. You change over to the tab for that printer and you go, yep, it's going well. And you change over to the tab for the next printer, yep, it's going well, and you go right back to doing what you're doing.
So is that a 7-inch?
Octoprint or?
What's that?
Are you using this Octoprint?
It does not use Octoprint. It's got its own.
It has an ESP32 something. I don't remember the chip. That's the Wi-Fi interface chip that interfaces with Wi-Fi. Instead of hooking it up through USB,
Yeah.
it has a Wi-Fi server that it hosts.
Yeah, it's actually got its own Wi-Fi firmware that's in there that you can update. It's
Because it's 32.
yeah, it's running RepRap firmware, which is a very open firmware, so you can do a lot of changes as far as personalizations. One of the things I recently learned is certain G code doesn't even need to exist on the Duet board. You can simply say M600. Who knows what M600 is in G code? Come on. I know there's Prusa owners here. M600.
Oh, Protoplant.
What's that? No.
Tool change.
M600 is pause or tool change. So you could actually just tell, you could put an M600 file on your Duet board and the Duet will go, hey, that's not a code I recognize. So it'll actually go out and look on your board to go, is there an M600 file? And then it'll pull it in. So like technically speaking, I could actually tell my slicer that whenever I want to pause, just put M600 in there, put on my Duet systems M600 and it works.
So you're telling it never to put in order 66?
Yes. But so that's kind of why I like that board, is its configurability. So when this all started and Shashi roped me into this, I was like, I don't know what I really want to do here. But I sent my notes to Shashi on Saturday, Sunday, somewhere in there, and he's like, this is great, but give me some examples. So here's my examples. This is the M200 and the M300. These are Zortrax printers. These are very expensive printers. They both arrived to me DOA for various reasons. The M200, if I remember correctly, didn't even start up. The M300 booted, but couldn't do anything with the control because it couldn't talk to the extruder. So the Zortrax 2 and 300 have a lot of things going for it, or at least that I thought. As far as the cons, it had a proprietary hot end. It kind of looked like the Rays, and I had heard a lot of things about it being jammy and stuff like that, so I was like, no, we're gonna get rid of the hot end. That's out of there. It also had this funky perforated bed, which is typical for ABS focused systems because they expect you to print with a raft all the time. And so the plastic is supposed to stick down into that and stay tighter. And I didn't want that. I like a nice smooth surface on the bottom, and I don't like printing with a raft if I don't have to, so that went away. The ribbon cable for power. This is a big pet peeve of mine. A ribbon cable is not intended to do power transfer, all right? They're getting away with this by basically taking your power and splitting it over multiple wires so that they're never overworking any one wire. But they've overlooked a few other things. You can't overdo the connector either. The connector's got a max current rating. And then if you've got the current spread across multiple wires, and by flexing it, you break one of those wires, now the rest of them are all overloaded, and you've got a fire hazard. So any printer that's running ribbon cable for your extruder, be afraid of, because...
One brand for the extruder.
What's that?
That's where the ribbon cable was, the extruder.
Yeah, the ribbon cable went from the bottom, like underneath the printer, all the way up to the top, and we're talking about over 500 millimeters on this ribbon cable, and I'm like, no wonder why it doesn't work. And then of course it had a proprietary controller board. What it did have going for it, which I really liked, is it had a 24 volt power supply, which any newer printer, you're gonna want that more power for playing with stuff. It also had a 24 volt DC heated bed on it. So I could heat up real quickly with the 24 volt, and the mechanics on it were extremely stout. Like we're talking 12 millimeter rods as opposed to the simple little 8 millimeter rods. It probably had the stiffest cantilever bed. Cantilever beds are one of those ones that they support it in the back and it just kind of hangs out there. And typically a cantilever bed will do this kind of bow thing. This one didn't do that. So I was very excited about being able to rebuild this with this bed not having to bounce around too much. So what I ended up doing is I put the Duet Wi-Fi controller in it, the Slicense Engineering Mosquito hot end, which is a new hot end that I had just seen about a year ago. a year? Nope, not quite a year. About 9 months ago. The thermodynamics on this hot end are impressive in terms of not jamming for PLA. I've only ever jammed this hot end twice, and both because of my own stupidity. One of them I stuck my finger in the cooling fan, and of course the heatsink then got really hot and jammed. The other was when I tried to double feed. So other than that, it's been a great thing. So all my fault on that. I put a BL touch sensor on it. Yes, sir.
Does this suggest that print head can go to 450 degree?
Yes. That 50 watt heater will go on the Slice Engineering will go to
And
450.
what kind of plastics do you use at that temperature?
You're going to play with your Peak, your Ultim, those types of materials up there.
Okay, thank you.
But if your electrical components, like your motors and so on, aren't rated for that, because you're going to be doing it in an enclosure.
Right, yes.
You can't get there.
Right, no, exactly.
So you
Yeah.
can't get there. So, no.
There's other reasons you can't get there.
Yeah. So
So have you tried printing with solder or something like that?
No, I've not tried printing this on. I did put the BL Touch on there because if you looked, I don't know how to, let's see if I can go back to this later. I can't, okay. So on the heat bed on the Zortrax, there's 5 metal pads that are exposed. It did the very typical Wolfsbot type thing where it does a conductivity test to see where the bed's at to level it. And well, I took the bed off because of the perforation, so now I had to figure out how I was going to level it. So that's when I went to a BL touch sensor on it instead. The panel do display because I thought I was going to need a display, but turns out once you go Wi-Fi, you don't go back. Put the Built-Tac flex plate system on it because, again, got rid of that bed. And I used shielded, appropriately gauged wires to go from the bottom up to the top.
Why shielded?
Just because I didn't want any kind of crosstalk going across the length I was going. I was going half a meter at least on the wiring, so I didn't want any kind of crosstalk. Yes, sir?
Just a comment on the wiring, how that you use the multi-stranded wire, the 300-strand wire. Works a lot better with flexible, for not breaking.
Okay, that wouldn't surprise me. I don't know exactly. This stuff I bought was, had 8 conductor in it, and I'm not sure if it was stranded or not. It was definitely intended for being non-breaking.
The problem was if it was flexible.
Yeah.
Stranded by nature will have higher conductivity than a single copper wire.
So this is what the M200 and the M300 looked like after I was done with them. The M200 here is showing before the flex plate actually arrived. So at this point, the metal bed that it just had, I just put a sheet of PEI on it for the time being. It now is sporting a flex plate.
It still won't conduct with PEI,
What won't conduct?
the old leveling system.
Oh, no,
With
yeah.
PEI.
Right, no, that's why I've got a BL Touch on there now.
No, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, no trying to conduct in terms of, I don't like the pecking in terms of trying to find where the bed is, especially if you're gonna run a ruby nozzle.
It always seems too little too late.
Yeah. So, that's what these guys ended up look like. And these were both at Portland Mini Maker Fair last year. That picture you saw earlier in the top left with the funny guy wearing the gnome hat.
Caps?
Yeah, that was, yes, sir.
What's the stop and smell the filament about?
So Protopasta makes made scented filaments, and so we had a cinnamon and a rose and those types of things that smelled when they were extruded. So that was stop and smell the filament. Coffee was a good one too. So here's a couple of prints, and this is the mosquito.
Oh, that's a good nice audit.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if this video will actually run for us now. Maybe. Oh, I had a nice video. So this video, I did take a video of this hot end when this was like my first day with it, and I managed to get down in with real close. And I posted it on social media, and Slice Engineering was like, "That's the best video footage we've had of our hot end. Can we borrow it?" So this may actually be on their website. It's local. It should be. It's a local file. than I'm used to seeing.
Do they also make a 3 millimeter?
They do not, but ask me about that later. Yeah, there's supposed to be a bar right here to play it. So, since my videos aren't working, this one's not going to be any good either. This hot end I actually put on Senior is actually the Magnum, which is equivalent to the E3D Volcano. And so he does all my large prints, and I typically have him over extruding, so I'm running him with a 0.8 nozzle and usually extruding to 1.2 millimeters. And he likes to just chew through carbon fiber like nobody's business. He's running about 100 grams an hour, just spitting it out, moving along. This was a really good video. Unfortunately, the controls aren't showing up, so I can't show you. So those were the Zortrax, and I did those, modified those because they were dead. Now I'm going to show you an example of one you can do that's working just fine, but let's get some better prints out of it. So this is the Formbot T-Rex 2 Plus, which I named Ellie, which is short for elephant in the room because he's huge. He's got a dual zone heat bed, which if you know anything about bed leveling, if you're going to do dual zone, you're going to get some kind of artifacting from the fact that one part's heated and one part's not. So it's like, what's the point? The heat bed's on a totally separate controller, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. So it's not controllable via G-code whatsoever. It's basically, I can slice, it can tell it there's a heat bed, I can tell it there's no heat bed, doesn't matter. I've got to control it off to the side separately. The Z motors, there's 2 Z motors on this guy, but they're ganged together. So they think they're always in sync, but they're not. Which is probably the biggest problem with him, is that for the longest time, I thought my bed kept going out of level. When it turns out, I finally realized it was always left to right wrong. Forward and back was still good, left to right was always wrong. And it turned out that one motor would get a little laggy or speed up from the other one, and then everything was out of whack left to right. So I talked to the Duet guys after I just played with their boards, and they're like, we want you to try and do this. And so this project was because Duet said, let's do it. And the goal, I'll show you in a minute. I'm actually just going to, I'm sure you've all read this already. The goal were to get him on an open and configurable firmware so I could play with him, because his current ABL stuff was only half implemented. I set up the auto bed leveling, and it wouldn't actually run. It would store the bed, but it didn't do anything with it after that. But then the dual Z motors, I wanted to actually be able to control them separately. And so if I went left to right and found that it was out of whack, I could just simply move one motor or the other to bring it back in. And I wanted the ABL to function. I also wanted the heat bed to be G-code controlled, because if I leave that thing printing, I don't want that heat bed running all day while the print's done. I want it to be able to shut off after it's done. So I wanted to be able to control that. And then it's an IDEX system. I wanted to be able to have filament runout sensors on both heads, not just one. So the orange box in the back there is the separate controller for the heat bed, which is on a really short tether, so you really can't reach it very well either on a big printer like this. It's just not well thought out in terms of design. So it was just, I really wanted to open this thing up. So again, I went with the Duet board because while Duet kind of said, hey, let's try this, we want to see this done. Due to the fact that the Duet doesn't have quite enough control or quite enough input outputs for dual Z motors, dual extruders, and all the regular stuff that's in there, we had to put an add-on board on there, and we're gonna put, so I put the DuX on there instead. I only needed a few extra, as opposed to the Duo, is it Du5, DuX5, DuX5, which adds even more, which is another nice thing about the Duet system, is that you can actually expand onto it and not have to change out completely. If you need more input outputs, there's add-on boards to get you there. Again, I put the Mosquito hotends on there This time with the 50-watt cartridge, just for simply, that's what they come with as far as mosquitoes. And I didn't put anything high temperature as far as a thermistor, because I'm not going to enclose this thing. I'm not going to try to do anything like that. This thing is probably just going to print PLA. I happen to have some E3D Titan extruders laying around, so they're going on there. And again, like I mentioned earlier about the panel doof 7, I just went with a 5 because I didn't need anything. Ellie is also my test bed for all of the different print platforms we were talking about earlier. Primarily this happened because of the large bed and the dual heating zones that I was dealing with, and the fact that turning on that heat bed, if I have to turn on the whole thing, which you have to do if you're don't want warped board bed, it takes almost 10 amps. And so that means a lot of other printers can't run. And so I was playing with running cold, and so I got the GeckoTech cold for this at one point, and so Ellie became my let's test build surface printer, and that's what she does a lot. Yes, sir.
I'm curious on this heat issue. Why didn't you just take the heat output from your controller, use that to operate a relay for the higher power?
That's what I'm doing.
Oh, that's what you ended up doing.
For what I'm doing on the modification is that's what we're going to do with this one, yeah.
Oh, and then the second thing is when your left and right steppers get out of sync,
Yes.
can't you just twist them by hand and get them back?
You can, but that's that's fidgety in terms of how much do I turn it? You know, the Mark II, Mark III. Whenever I move those, I always pick it up by the crossbar like you're not supposed to. Put it down, and the first thing I do is a Z calibration, and it's nice because it rams it up towards the top, gets them both in the sync, and brings them back down. The FormBot didn't have that.
Okay.
You know, that was not one of the things. If it had that, that would have been nice. I could have at least worked around it. I could go, hey, ram up to the top, come back down. It doesn't do that. So this was a workaround in terms of getting that resolved. So Ellie's not done yet. I was hoping to get Ellie done in time to bring her here, but projects always take longer, right? So just to kind of wrap up on what we talked about, your quality mechanics are timeless. Once you've got a good frame, if you're willing to put in a little time for some playing around with some other things, that frame can be around forever. You can keep the machine current if your firmware is open, if it's not locked down or restricted in any way, shape, or form like the FormBot was. And replace your controller if the firmware isn't open. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Okay, not as much a question, but one, go back to the one before. I love one of those points, not the one before, the one you were on. So machine options are broader, firmware is configurable.
Yes.
That's been amazing with the Duet.
Yes.
So I've worked with the CR10S, S5, a bunch of other printers. I've abandoned all my Net A8s for the sake of their 8-bit firmware. I don't use Marlin, like I open it up once every few months just to upgrade one printer. This printer was over extruding. If you look at these prints, they're pretty bad. Like if you can notice some over extrusion, some rippling, it's not that good. But when I want to change acceleration, when I want to toy with the PID numbers, when I want to toy with the temperature, or play with just extrusion factors, I can write that into the firmware, hit reset, and it just automatically has the new flow percentages, has the new flow rate, has the proper acceleration numbers, the proper everything for it. I don't have to reflash firmware every time I change settings.
The other positive about the Duet is that there is no connected to the PC, compile your firmware, send your firmware over via serial, and then reboot. On Duet boards, everything is a file-based. It's all file-based right on the board itself. So you make the changes in the files, your reboot, you're done. There's no reflashing to actually make these configuration changes that are normally considered firmware level changes that involve compiling, which makes it wonderful to work with, tinker with, try out new things. It's very much a smorgasbord of configurability.
That's the RepRap firmware, not?
It is a RepRap firmware, which is, again, very nice. There's a lot of commands in there.
And it isn't Duet specific.
It is not Duet specific. It is genuinely RepRap firmware, not Duet firmware. It's not theirs. It's what reprap.org has decided these should be the commands out there. And they do have a few other boards that actually run RepRap firmware, which I'd love to try out. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
For what I'm running, that still is a Sailfish firmware machine. That's a board swap, or is that,
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get
you're
anything.
not gonna find anything that'll?
Yeah, no, that's.
Marlin on that board.
Can you?
That's selfish.
Yeah, it's a PD. Good. Good.
Yeah, if you could get to Marlin on it.
I wouldn't do it. Marlin.
Oh, does it? It's the only machine I've had so far, so.
No, that's a good machine. It's a solid machine.
Getting a lot of work done, but there's some things like acceleration and stuff that I can't seem to get to.
Yeah, you can change that over USB. You don't have to refresh or anything. You can change it over USB. You'll plug directly in.
I gotta plug in to do that then.
What's that?
I gotta plug in to do that, and
Either that or go Octoprint. You can change it over Octoprint.
yeah.
I think you could put it in your start G code as well.
No, it's not a selfish.
Ignore me.
Huh?
Ignore me.
Yeah. Yeah, the M201, 202, and 203 codes are ignored for selfish. The GPX translator doesn't work.
Yeah, that's where I keep running into it, is the GPX translator just says, hey, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Any other questions? I'll turn it back over to Shashi. All right, Shashi, it's all yours.
All right, next meeting is